Montana Territory, 1875. Owen Blackett stared at the letter in his hands, the yellowed paper creasing beneath his calloused fingers. The weight of the words felt heavier than the cattle he'd spent his morning herding. 26 years old and already worn down by the harshness of frontier life, he gazed out across the rolling plains surrounding his modest ranch. The setting sun cast long shadows across the land he'd fought so hard to claim, land that now felt emptier than ever. "Ain't no woman gonna survive out here," he muttered to himself, folding the letter and tucking it inside his vest pocket. The thought had been his mantra since losing his parents to frontier fever 5 years prior. The West was no place for tenderness. It stripped away everything soft, leaving only what was tough enough to endure. Owen had built his walls high, convinced that attachment only led to more pain. Better to face the wilderness alone than to watch someone you love wither beneath its cruelty. Yet something had compelled him to respond to that advertisement months ago, a moment of weakness, perhaps, or a flicker of hope he thought he'd extinguished long ago. Now a bride was coming and he was certain it was a mistake. What did he know about being a husband, about sharing his life? The frontier had taught him one thing: survival meant keeping to yourself. He mounted his horse and rode back toward the cabin, a modest structure he'd built with his own hands. It wasn't much, 2 rooms with a stone fireplace, but it was his. Tomorrow he would meet the stage in Willow Creek, and his life would change forever. For better or worse remained to be seen, but Owen Blackett had long ago stopped believing in better. The stagecoach lurched violently as it hit another rut, sending Josephine Hayes tumbling against the side panel. At 22, she had already endured more than most women twice her age. The fine blue traveling dress she wore, her only good garment, was now wrinkled and stained from 3 days of hard travel. Her blonde hair, once neatly pinned, had come loose in several places, and she pushed a wayward strand behind her ear. "Not much farther to Willow Creek, miss," the driver called down, his voice barely audible over the rumbling wheels. Josephine clutched the letter in her hand more tightly. The correspondence had been brief but promising: a man with his own ranch, seeking a wife. After her father's death and the subsequent loss of their Philadelphia home to creditors, the promise of a new start had been her only option. The alternative, working in her uncle's textile mill for pennies a day while enduring his wandering hands, had become unbearable. "Please let him be kind," she whispered, her words lost in the jostle of the coach. The West represented both her greatest fear and her only hope. She had no illusions about frontier life, but surely it couldn't be worse than what she was leaving behind. As the stagecoach pulled into Willow Creek, Josephine peered anxiously through the dust-coated window. The town was smaller than she'd imagined, a single street lined with wooden buildings, a far cry from Philadelphia's bustling avenues. Her stomach knotted with anxiety. What if he wasn't there? What if he took one look at her and changed his mind? The coach rolled to a stop outside the general store, and the driver opened the door. "Willow Creek, ma'am." Josephine stepped down carefully, clutching her small carpetbag. The spring air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and something untamed. Several townspeople paused to stare at the newcomer, making no attempt to hide their curiosity. Owen stood apart from the small gathering, his hat pulled low over his eyes. He hadn't expected her to be so delicate, like something that might break if handled too roughly. Her blonde hair caught the sunlight, and despite the wrinkles in her dress, she carried herself with a dignity that seemed at odds with the dusty frontier town. For a moment, he considered turning around and riding back to his ranch alone, sparing them both the inevitable disappointment. Instead, he removed his hat and stepped forward. "Miss Hayes." Josephine turned toward the voice, taking in the man before her. He was younger than she'd expected, tall and broad-shouldered, with clear blue eyes that studied her cautiously. His face was handsome, with only a light stubble across a strong jaw, and though his clothes were worn, they were clean. He looked capable, the kind of man who could survive in this wild country. But it was the wariness in his expression that caused her heart to sink. "Mr. Blackett?" she asked, trying to keep the tremor from her voice. "Yes, ma'am." He reached for her bag. "Let me take that for you." Their fingers brushed as he took the carpetbag, and both withdrew quickly as if burned. An awkward silence fell between them. "The ride was comfortable, I hope?" Owen finally asked, though it was clear from her appearance that it had been anything but. "It was," she hesitated, unwilling to start with a lie. "Educational." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "That's one way of putting it." He gestured toward a wagon parked at the end of the street. "My ranch is about 2 hours' ride from town. We should head out if we want to make it before dark." As they walked toward the wagon, Josephine felt the stares of the townspeople. A woman leaned close to her companion and whispered something that made them both laugh. Owen noticed too, his jaw tightening. "Don't mind them," he said quietly. "They don't get many new faces around here, especially not." "Mail order brides," Josephine finished when he trailed off. He nodded, helping her onto the wagon seat. "I've arranged for Reverend Phillips to marry us tomorrow, if that suits you. You can stay in town tonight if you prefer. Mrs. Miller runs a clean boarding house." The bluntness of his statement took Josephine aback. This was happening so quickly. "I would prefer to see where I'll be living first, if you don't mind." Owen climbed up beside her, careful to maintain distance between them. "As you wish." The wagon pulled away from town, and Josephine watched as Willow Creek receded behind them. Ahead stretched miles of open country, beautiful but intimidating in its vastness. "It's very different from Philadelphia," she said, more to herself than to him. Owen glanced at her. "Is that where you're from?" "Yes, my father was a bookkeeper." She didn't mention his gambling debts or how quickly her security had vanished after his death. "And you, have you always lived in Montana Territory?" "Came out with my parents when I was 16, they're gone now." His tone made it clear he didn't wish to elaborate. The wagon hit a rut, jolting them both. Owen instinctively reached out to steady her but withdrew his hand as soon as she was balanced. "I should warn you," he said after a long silence, "ranching life is hard. Especially for a woman used to city comforts." Josephine straightened her shoulders. "I'm stronger than I look, Mr. Blackett." "Owen," he corrected. "If we're to be married tomorrow, you might as well use my given name." "Owen," she repeated, the name unfamiliar on her tongue. "And I'm Josephine." He nodded but said nothing more. As they traveled, the landscape opened before them, rolling hills covered in spring grass, mountains rising in the distance like sentinels. Despite her apprehension, Josephine couldn't help but be moved by its wild beauty. "It's magnificent," she breathed. Owen followed her gaze, seeing the land through her eyes for a moment. "It can kill you just as easy as it can feed you." "Most beautiful things carry danger," she replied. He looked at her then, really looked at her, wondering what dangers this beautiful woman might bring to his carefully ordered life. The ranch came into view as the sun began its descent, a modest cabin with a barn and corral nestled against a backdrop of pine trees. A stream cut through the property, its waters catching the golden light. It wasn't grand, but it had a rough-hewn charm that spoke of hard work and perseverance. "It's not much," Owen said as he helped her down from the wagon. "But it's mine, paid for." Josephine took in her surroundings. "You built all this yourself." Most of it had help with the barn raising. Pride crept into his voice despite his attempt at nonchalance. "Come inside. You must be tired." The cabin interior was spare but clean. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and simple wooden furniture filled the main room. Through an open doorway, she glimpsed a bedroom with a bed covered in a patchwork quilt. "You'll take the bedroom," Owen said, following her gaze. "I'll sleep out here until," he cleared his throat, "until after the wedding." Josephine flushed, suddenly very aware of what marriage would mean. "Thank you." Owen moved to the fireplace, building a fire with practiced efficiency. "I'll fix us something to eat." As he worked, Josephine noticed how his movements were economical, no wasted effort. It was clear he was accustomed to doing everything himself. The thought brought a question to her lips before she could consider its wisdom. "Why did you advertise for a wife?" she asked. His hands stilled momentarily before resuming their task. "A man needs someone to help with the work, to keep a home. You could hire help." "Can't afford to pay wages." The fire caught and he stood, Not much money in cattle these days. It wasn't the whole truth, and they both knew it. But Josephine didn't press further. She was tired, and tomorrow would bring challenges enough. They ate a simple meal of beans and cornbread in relative silence. Afterward, Owen showed her where everything was kept and brought water for her to wash. "I'll be outside checking on the stock," he said. "Take your time getting settled." When he was gone, Josephine sank onto the edge of the bed, the reality of her situation crashing over her. She was miles from civilization with a man she barely knew, about to pledge her life to him. Had desperation driven her to madness? No, she decided. Not madness, hope. Difficult as it might be, this life offered something her old one couldn't: freedom from her uncle's house and the chance to build something of her own. Owen Blackett might be reserved, even cold, but he hadn't looked at her with the predatory gleam she'd grown to fear in Philadelphia. She unpacked her few belongings, placing her mother's silver hairbrush on the rough-hewn table beside the bed. The familiar object in this strange setting brought tears to her eyes, but she blinked them away. There was no room for weakness on the frontier. The next morning dawned clear and cool. Josephine woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of movement in the main room. She dressed quickly in her best dress, the same blue traveling outfit, hastily brushed clean, and emerged to find Owen already dressed in a clean shirt, his hair damp from washing. "Morning," he said, pouring her a cup of coffee. "Did you sleep well?" "Yes, thank you," she lied, not mentioning how she'd lain awake listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the wilderness. Owen nodded, seeming relieved. "We should head to town if you still want to," he paused, "if you haven't changed your mind." Josephine met his gaze directly. "Have you?" "No," his answer came quickly, surprising them both with its certainty. The ceremony at the small church in Willow Creek was brief, attended only by the Reverend's wife as witness. Josephine spoke her vows clearly, though her heart pounded so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. Owen's voice was steady, his calloused hand warm as it held hers. "You may kiss the bride," Reverend Phillips announced. Owen hesitated, then leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss so gentle and quick it was over almost before it began. Yet Josephine felt her cheeks warm at this first intimate contact. After signing the marriage certificate, they walked down Willow Creek's main street as husband and wife. Owen stopped at the general store. "You'll be needing things," he said. "Pick out whatever you need to make the cabin more comfortable." "I don't want to be a burden on your finances," Josephine replied, mindful of his comment about money being tight. "A wife should have what she needs." His tone brooked no argument. Inside the store, Mrs. Miller from the boarding house approached, eyeing Josephine with open curiosity. "So you went through with it," she said to Owen. When Tom Jackson's bride saw his place, she was back on the next stage east. Owen stiffened beside her. "Mrs. Blackett has more backbone than that." The use of her new name sent an unexpected thrill through Josephine. She straightened her shoulders and smiled politely. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Miller. My husband's ranch is lovely." Mrs. Miller's eyebrows rose at the word lovely, but she nodded. "Well, I hope you'll both come to the social next month." About time Owen stopped keeping to himself. As they shopped, Josephine selected only practical items: fabric for curtains and linens, cooking utensils, and seeds for a kitchen garden. Owen watched her choices with approval. "You're practical," he observed as they loaded their purchases into the wagon. "I've learned to be," she replied. The ride back to the ranch was more comfortable than the previous day's journey. Something had shifted between them, a tentative understanding, perhaps, or the simple recognition that they were now bound together, for better or worse. As they approached the ranch, the sun was setting in a spectacular display of orange and pink. Josephine gasped at the beauty of it. "Does it always look like this?" she asked. Owen glanced at the sky as if seeing it for the first time. "Pretty much, never paid it much mind." When they reached the cabin, he helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. The weight of what was to come hung between them. "I'll unload the supplies," Owen said, turning away. "You can get settled." Inside, Josephine stood in the middle of the cabin, suddenly unsure. This was her home now, but it still felt like foreign territory. She busied herself preparing dinner, finding comfort in the familiar task. They ate by lamplight, the silence less strained than before but still heavy with unspoken thoughts. When the meal was done, Owen cleared his throat. "I'll sleep in the barn tonight," he said, not meeting her eyes. "Give you time to get used to things." Relief and an odd disappointment mingled in Josephine's chest. "You don't have to do that, this is your home." "Our home," he corrected, "and I'm not in any rush." He stood, gathering his bedroll. "Good night, Josephine." After he left, she sat alone in the cabin, listening to the night sounds. The marriage was not what she had expected, but perhaps that was for the best. Owen Blackett was giving her time and space, commodities that had been in short supply in her uncle's house. For that alone, she was grateful. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Owen rose before dawn to tend the cattle, while Josephine prepared breakfast and began the household tasks. They worked separately, but in a dance that gradually became more synchronized. She planted her garden, hung curtains at the windows, and organized the cabin's sparse contents with an efficiency that seemed to surprise and please her husband. 1 week after the wedding, a spring storm blew in, bringing driving rain that turned the yard to mud. Owen returned from checking the herd soaked to the skin and shivering. "You'll catch your death," Josephine scolded, helping him out of his wet coat. "Sit by the fire while I heat water." For once he didn't argue, sinking into a chair by the hearth. She brought him a towel for his hair and a blanket to wrap around his shoulders, then busied herself preparing a hot meal. When her hand brushed his as she handed him a bowl of stew, she was alarmed by how cold his skin felt. "You should get out of those wet clothes," she said, then blushed at the implications. "I mean." "I know what you mean," he said, a rare smile touching his lips. "Don't worry." But later that night, Josephine woke to the sound of coughing from the main room. Owen had insisted on sleeping near the hearth rather than joining her in the bedroom, despite the increasingly cool nights. She rose and found him huddled beneath his blankets, his face flushed with fever. "Owen," she said, kneeling beside him. "You're ill." He tried to sit up but fell back, racked by another cough. "Just need to rest." Josephine pressed her hand to his forehead. "You're burning up, let me help you to the bed." "I'm fine right here," he insisted, but his voice was weak. "Don't be stubborn," she said firmly. "You need proper rest." With effort she helped him to the bedroom, where he collapsed onto the bed. She removed his boots and covered him with quilts, then dampened a cloth to place on his forehead. "My parents," he murmured, his eyes glazed with fever. "They started like this, the coughing." Understanding dawned on Josephine. "Is that how they died?" He nodded weakly. "Frontier fever, nothing the doctor could do." "This isn't frontier fever," she assured him, though she couldn't be certain. "It's just a chill from being wet and cold." Throughout the night she sat beside him, replacing the cool cloth on his forehead and helping him sip water when he woke. By morning his fever had broken, but he was still weak. "You should have left me by the fire," he said when he was lucid enough to speak clearly. Josephine handed him a cup of broth. "And let you die." "What kind of wife would I be?" "The kind with sense enough not to risk catching what I have." "I'm stronger than you think," she replied, echoing her words from their first day together. Owen studied her face, seeing something there he hadn't noticed before, not just beauty but resilience. "Yes," he agreed softly, "I believe you are." The illness forced a new intimacy between them. With Owen confined to bed for several days, Josephine took on the outdoor chores as well as her usual tasks. He watched from the window as she fed the chickens and milked the cow, moving with increasing confidence around the ranch. "You're a natural," he commented when she returned, cheeks flushed from exertion. "Hardly," she laughed. "The cow nearly kicked over the milk pail twice." "But you got the milk." He smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes and transformed his face. "That's what counts out here, getting the job done no matter what." As Owen recovered, their relationship shifted subtly. He began to seek her opinion on ranch matters, and she found herself genuinely interested in his work. In the evenings they sat together by the fire, the silence between them now comfortable rather than strained. One night, as Josephine mended a shirt by lamplight, Owen watched her nimble fingers work the needle. "Why did you answer my advertisement?" he asked suddenly. "What made you leave Philadelphia for this?" He gestured around the modest cabin. Josephine's hands stilled. She could give him the simple answer that she had nowhere else to go after her father's death, but something in his expression invited honesty. "My uncle," she said quietly. "After my father died, I had to live with him. He was not kind." She swallowed hard. "I feared what would happen if I stayed." Owen's expression darkened. "Did he hurt you?" "Not in the way you're thinking, but he made it clear what he expected, and she shook her head. "I couldn't." "So you came west to marry a stranger instead?" "Yes," she met his gaze steadily, "and I don't regret it." Owen moved to sit beside her on the bench, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "I'm sorry about your uncle, and I'm glad you're here." The simple statement warmed her more than any declaration of passion could have. For the first time, Josephine felt truly welcome in this place. As spring yielded to summer, the ranch flourished under their combined efforts. Josephine's garden produced vegetables for their table, and she learned to preserve food for the coming winter. Owen taught her to ride and shoot, skills he insisted were necessary in the isolated territory. "You're a natural with that rifle," he said approvingly after she hit a target on her third attempt. "Good eye." "My father taught me chess," she explained. "He said it was about seeing the whole board at once. Shooting feels similar." Owen nodded, impressed. "Chess, huh? Maybe you could teach me sometime." "I would like that," she replied, pleased by his interest. Their marriage remained unconsummated, a fact that sometimes hung between them like an unspoken question. Owen continued to sleep near the hearth, and though Josephine occasionally caught him looking at her with hunger in his eyes, he made no move to claim his husbandly rights. One evening in late June, they received their first visitors, the Millers from town, along with their son Daniel, who ran the general store. Mrs. Miller's eyes took in every detail of the cabin, now brightened with curtains and fresh-cut wildflowers. "You've made this place downright civilized, Josephine," she said, clearly surprised. "I hardly recognize it." "Owen built a good home," Josephine replied, loyal to her husband despite their still-evolving relationship. "I've just added a few touches." Daniel Miller seemed particularly impressed by these touches, or perhaps by Josephine herself. Throughout the visit, his attention rarely left her, a fact that didn't escape Owen's notice. "You're lucky to have found such a capable wife," Daniel said as they stood outside, preparing to leave. "And beautiful, too." Owen's jaw tightened. "I know exactly how fortunate I am." After the Millers departed, an unusual tension filled the cabin. Owen was quieter than usual, his movements sharp as he helped clean up after their guests. "Did I do something wrong?" Josephine finally asked. "You seem angry." "Not with you," he said, then fell silent again. "With Daniel, then, he was only being polite." Owen gave a short, humorless laugh. "Is that what you call it? The man couldn't keep his eyes off you." "And that bothers you?" She couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. "You're my wife," he said simply, as if that explained everything. Josephine felt a flutter of hope. "Yes, I am. Though sometimes I wonder if you remember that." Their eyes met across the room and something electric passed between them. Owen took a step toward her, then stopped, uncertainty written across his face. "I remember," he said, his voice rough. "Every day." That night, as Josephine prepared for bed, a knock came at the bedroom door. She opened it to find Owen standing there, his expression unreadable. "May I come in?" he asked. She nodded, suddenly nervous. He entered but remained near the door, keeping a respectful distance. "I wanted to thank you," he said, "for making this place a home. I never thought it could be that." "It's our home," she replied softly, "yours and mine." He took a deep breath. "Josephine, I know this isn't the marriage you deserved. You should have had courting and romance, not a desperate arrangement with a stranger." "I wasn't looking for romance," she said. "I was looking for safety, and you've given me that." "Is that enough?" he asked, and she heard the real question beneath his words. "Am I enough?" Josephine moved closer, finding courage she didn't know she possessed. "It's a start." Owen's hand came up to touch her cheek, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "I don't want to rush you. You've been more patient than most men would be. I want you to be sure," he said. "This life with me, it's what you want." In answer, Josephine rose on tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. For a moment, Owen remained still, and she feared she had misread the situation entirely. Then his arms came around her, pulling her against him as he returned the kiss with an intensity that left her breathless. When they parted, his eyes were dark with desire, but he maintained control. "Are you certain?" "Yes," she whispered. "I'm certain." That night Owen Blackett joined his wife in their bed for the first time, and the last walls between them began to crumble. Summer brought its own challenges. A drought settled over the territory, turning the lush spring grass brown and forcing Owen to move the cattle to higher pastures in search of water. He was gone for days at a time, leaving Josephine to manage the ranch alone. She proved equal to the task, rising before dawn to complete her chores before the worst heat of the day set in. The garden required constant attention to keep it from withering, and she hauled water from the stream until her arms ached. When Owen returned from the high country, dusty and exhausted, she met him with a hot meal and quiet strength that increasingly became his anchor. "How do you do it?" he asked one evening as they sat on the porch, watching heat lightning dance on the horizon. "Stay so steady when everything's falling apart." Josephine considered the question. "My father used to say that panic is a luxury for those with options. When there's only one path forward, you take it, one step at a time." Owen's hand found hers in the gathering darkness. "You're the strongest person I know, Josephine Blackett." The drought broke in August with a thunderstorm that shook the cabin and sent the stream over its banks. Owen and Josephine worked side by side in driving rain to secure the animals and prevent the water from flooding their home. By morning the worst had passed, leaving behind mud and debris but no serious damage. They stood surveying their land, soaked to the skin but triumphant. "We did it," Josephine said, pushing wet hair from her face. "Everything's safe." Owen looked at her, really looked at her, and something shifted in his expression. "I love you," he said simply, the words emerging as if they'd been waiting a long time to be spoken. Josephine's heart soared. "I love you too." The declaration changed nothing and everything. Their days continued much as before, filled with work and the constant demands of ranch life, but now there was a certainty between them, a foundation on which to build. In late September, as they prepared for winter, Josephine began to suspect she was pregnant. She kept the suspicion to herself at first, not wanting to raise hopes that might be dashed. But as the weeks passed and the signs became unmistakable, she knew she must tell Owen. She chose an evening when they sat before the fire, his arm around her shoulders as he read aloud from a book they'd ordered from back east, one of the small luxuries they now allowed themselves. "Owen," she said during a pause between chapters, "I have something to tell you." He marked their place in the book and set it aside, giving her his full attention. "What is it?" I'm sure, we're going to have a baby." Owen went very still, his expression unreadable. "A baby," he repeated, as if testing the word. Josephine felt a flicker of uncertainty. "Yes. In the spring, I think." Suddenly Owen was on his knees before her, his hands cradling her face. "A baby," he said again, and this time there was wonder in his voice. "Our baby." Relief washed over her. "You're happy, then?" "Happy doesn't begin to cover it." He pressed his forehead to hers. "Terrified, yes, but so very happy." As winter settled over the Montana territory, blanketing the land in snow, the Blackett cabin glowed with warmth and purpose. Josephine's belly grew round beneath her dresses, and Owen found himself watching her with a mixture of pride and protective concern. He insisted on taking on more of the household tasks, despite her protests that she wasn't an invalid. "You're carrying our future," he said, gently but firmly. "Let me help." The Millers visited again, bringing news from town and gifts for the coming baby. Even Daniel seemed to have accepted that Josephine was thoroughly and happily married, his manner now respectful rather than admiring. "The social's next week," Mrs. Miller reminded them. "You'll both come, won't you? Everyone's eager to see how you're getting along." Josephine glanced at Owen, who nodded. "We'll be there," she promised. The Willow Creek Social was held in the newly constructed town hall, a simple building transformed by lanterns and evergreen boughs into a festive gathering place. Josephine wore her best dress, altered to accommodate her growing figure, and Owen had trimmed his hair and beard for the occasion. As they entered, conversation momentarily halted, all eyes turning to the couple. Then Mrs. Miller hurried forward, breaking the silence. "Josephine, Owen, come in, everyone's been asking after you." Throughout the evening, Josephine found herself the center of attention as the women of Willow Creek offered advice and stories about childbirth and childrearing. Owen watched from across the room, where he stood with the other men, discussing cattle prices and the coming spring. "Your husband can't take his eyes off you," Martha Jenkins, the blacksmith's wife, commented with a knowing smile. "Not many look at their wives that way after the honeymoon's over." Josephine glanced toward Owen, catching his gaze. He smiled, and even across the crowded room, she felt the connection between them, stronger now than she could have imagined on that first uncertain day. "We had an unusual start," she admitted. "But I wouldn't change how things turned out." Later, as they drove home through the cold, clear night, Owen pulled the wagon to a stop at the crest of a hill overlooking their ranch. In the moonlight, the cabin window glowed with the light they'd left burning, a beacon calling them home. "Look at that," he said softly, "our place." Josephine leaned against him, drawing warmth from his solid presence. "It's beautiful." "I used to think the frontier was no place for love," Owen confessed. "That out here a man could only count on himself, caring for someone just meant more to lose." He turned to face her, his expression serious in the moonlight. "I was wrong, Josephine. Having you, loving you, it's made me stronger, not weaker." "We're stronger together," she agreed. "That's what I've learned." He wrapped his arm around her, his hand coming to rest protectively over the swell of their child. "When I sent that advertisement, I was looking for a helpmate, someone to share the work. I never expected to find the other half of my soul." "And I was looking for safety," Josephine said. "I found that and so much more." They continued toward home, the wagon moving steadily through the snow-covered landscape. Behind them, their tracks formed a single path, two journeys merged into one, leading toward a future neither could have imagined alone. In the spring of 1876, as the land awakened from winter's grip, Josephine Blackett gave birth to a daughter. Owen paced outside the cabin while Martha Jenkins, who had experience as a midwife, attended his wife. The labor was long, and more than once Owen found himself praying to a God he'd long neglected. When at last the baby's cry pierced the air, he rushed inside to find Josephine pale but triumphant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. "We have a daughter," she whispered as he knelt beside the bed. "Come meet her." Owen peered down at the tiny face, his heart expanding with a love so fierce it almost frightened him. "She's perfect," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Just like her mother." They named her Elizabeth after Josephine's mother, and as spring gave way to summer, the little family flourished. The ranch prospered too, the cattle herd grew, and Owen was able to hire seasonal help for the first time, allowing him more time with his wife and daughter. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Elizabeth sleeping peacefully in Josephine's arms, Owen reflected on how much his life had changed in just over a year. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Answering my advertisement, coming west to marry a stranger." Josephine looked up from their daughter's sleeping face. "Never," she said without hesitation, "not for a single moment. Even when the work is hard. When winter seems endless, or drought threatens everything we've built." "Especially then," she replied, "because those are the times when it matters most that we face them together." Owen reached for her free hand, entwining their fingers. "I was so afraid of losing someone I loved, that I nearly missed the chance to love at all. And I was so desperate to escape that I almost missed the opportunity to find a true home. Josephine smiled. We rescued each other, I think. We did, Owen agreed, watching as the last light of day painted the land in gold and shadow. And we'll keep doing it every day for the rest of our lives. As darkness fell over the Montana territory, the Blackett cabin stood as a beacon of hope in the wilderness, proof that even in the harshest landscape, love could not only survive but flourish. What had begun as an arrangement born of desperation had transformed into something neither could have foreseen. A family, a partnership, a love strong enough to tame the wild frontier and gentle enough to nurture dreams that once seemed impossible. Together, they had discovered that true strength lay not in facing life's challenges alone, but in the courage to open one's heart to another. And in doing so, they had not only changed their own lives but created a legacy of love that would endure long after the frontier itself had faded into history.